last week I was horrified to report that Premier Rachel Notley's oil by rail scheme would cost roughly $1 billion if she followed through on her plan to spend taxpayers' dollars on oil by rail shipments. This week, I'm 4 times more mortified to inform you that the NDP are promising to spend 4 times more than originally estimated, nearly $4 billion on an oil by rail scheme in lieu of building an actual pipeline. Alberta's Premier Rachel Notley is making herself a bit of a railway mogul to hide her ongoing failures on the pipeline file. This is what CBC is reporting. The Alberta government has signed contracts with Canadian National and Canadian Pacific to lease 4,400 rail cars to take oil sands crude to American and international markets. The first shipment of 20,000 barrels per day are expected to start by July. Full capacity is expected by mid-2020, when up to 120,000 barrels per day will be shipped by rail. The oil by rail plan is a medium-term strategy for getting crude to market. The Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, if approved, isn't expected to be operating for at least 3 more years. Provincial officials say the program will cost $3.7 billion over 3 years and result in $5.9 billion in revenues over the same period. The anticipated net revenue is $2.2 billion over the same period. The ethical argument aside, of a lame duck premier with no mandate to make this sort of enormous spending commitment just 90 days out from a mandatory election, this is a very expensive bad idea. It sounds a lot like a Nigerian prince scheme, doesn't it? We just give Notley $3.7 billion to buy trains and then she'll give us back $5.9 billion? Sure, seems legit. Now, when I first reported Rachel Notley's flawed scheme to buy rail cars, I told you how her Venezuelan-style oil production curtailment measures had actually made oil by rail completely unprofitable, and major oil companies like Suncor were speaking out about it. But even after that warning by the very company that would be using train cars to ship their oil, well, it wasn't enough for Rachel Notley to pump the brakes on this crazy plan. Instead, she quadrupled it. And then she said, what a good deal it was for Albertans. Yes, it's a great deal for Albertans to spend money to do things that the private sector companies would have already done cheaper and better with these amazing things called pipelines. This is from Bloomberg. We know that there is absolutely no risk to finding markets for this product, Notley told reporters Tuesday when asked if the government's plan transfers risk from oil producers to taxpayers. Rafi Tamazian, senior portfolio manager at Canoe Financial, told Bloomberg, I think all of their energy should have been spent on trying to cure the illness, not trying to keep us alive with the illness. The cure is to get the pipelines, Tamazian said Tuesday after the announcement. Tamazian also said, instead, what we have is governments creating more and more interference in the private sector and costing us more and more. Tamazian went on to criticize Notley's description of her plan as having no risk. Notley is spending $3.7 billion of Albertans' money to try to create $2.2 billion of profit in the long term on her zero-risk policy. As an investor, that's irresponsible. A regulator would probably take my license away for making a statement like that. Zero risk. That's ridiculous. Okay, so that's the nuts and bolts of Notley's latest mess in the oil patch. But let's put that 120,000 barrels of oil per day in Notley's new rail pipeline into some proper context. TransCanada's now cancelled Energy East pipeline would have had a capacity to carry 1.1 million barrels of oil per day, nearly 10 times what Notley's train cars will. But Notley barely lifted a finger to save that $15.7 billion private sector investment that wouldn't have costed Albertans anything. And Notley flat out opposed Enbridge's Northern Gateway pipeline project. In fact, she campaigned against it. It was an $8 billion private sector investment that would have shipped out 525,000 barrels of oil per day. Again, with absolutely no cost to Alberta taxpayers. By the way, there's yet another pipeline the NDP need desperately now, but never actually wanted, and it hinges on the intervention of a president that the NDP can't help themselves but insult constantly. The Keystone XL pipeline would move nearly 830,000 barrels of Alberta oil per day, and it wouldn't cost us a red cent. But it's currently tangled up in legal wrangling and BS in American federal court and in Nebraska. And yet, Rachel Notley and the NDP aren't doing anything to help it along. In fact, all their anti-Trump rhetoric and running off at the mouth, well, it's probably hurting our case for the pipeline and definitely not helping it. But that's really nothing new now, is it? It's been like that since the beginning. In fact, just a couple of months after coming into power, Premier Rachel Notley fired Alberta's envoy to Washington, Rob Merrifield, 3 full years before his contract expired. He was the man whose sole job it was to sell our pipelines in the United States, and on his way out the door, Merrifield said Notley's government had stopped trying to sell U.S. lawmakers on Alberta's positions, and that Notley's bureaucrats had ordered him not to speak to the media, not to make speeches at U.S. events, and not to travel. So does anyone really believe Notley when she says she wants pipelines, any pipelines? If Notley really wanted to move some Alberta crude, she would be in Washington, groveling to President Trump for some help. But it's much easier to spend $4 billion of someone else's money that we don't even have because we are broke, rather than Notley swallow her pride and do the right thing for Albertans. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Rachel Notley likes to say that she's pro-pipeline, but she's come out against the United We Roll convoy for Canada. That convoy left Red Deer, Alberta, and it brought its pro-pipeline message all the way to Justin Trudeau's doorstep on Parliament Hill. To see the other side of the story, the truth about the convoy, you can see all of my colleague Cian Bexty's reports at rebelconvoy.com. And if you can support our independent journalism and help cover the cost for us to embed him on the convoy, you can do that there too at rebelconvoy.com.